Hey guys, John Palomy here, Actionable Intelligence. Today's Sunday, March 29th. I wanted to make this special video. Typically I just do the weekly market updates, but I wanted to make a video about what I'm seeing as a response to this coronavirus and what was actually happening before the coronavirus and what I am anticipating or what is happening in the financial markets and what is probably going to happen. Or it looks like it may happen. I don't want to say probably, but it has a good chance of happening. Basically, what we've seen even before the coronavirus hit was a slowdown in the world economy, and central banks were doing the one thing that they can only do, and that's lower interest rates and provide liquidity into the markets, create currency units. Now, since the coronavirus has hit, since January, I've got this information from a site that I follow. I'll put it in the show notes. It tracks interest rates around the world, who's cutting them, the news every week. You can get it on a daily update, what central banks are cutting rates. But just from this last week in their weekly report, that we've had 12 central banks have cut rates so far. And it lists them, and they're all rinky-dink countries that nobody really thinks about, with the exception of India and Canada. But the point being is that I think a lot of people in the developed world don't understand or don't think about the rest of the world, the other 7 billion people in the world. Western Europe and the United States are only around 600, 700 million people total. And what about the other 7 or 8 billion people? What are they doing? Just in March, as this thing's really taken off in the news around the world, we've had 61 different central banks have cut their key interest rates 80 times. Since late January, when the outbreak of the coronavirus first began to affect financial markets, policy rates have been cut an astounding 100 times, with many central banks cutting rates multiple times in response to the growing threat to economies worldwide. Illustrating the speed with which the threat to economic growth has mushroomed, 53 of those rate cuts have been taken at multiple extraordinary policy meetings, such as those by the U.S. Federal Reserve, the Bank of Canada, the Bank of England, and the Reserve Bank of Australia. So what we're seeing is an unprecedented response to this forced economic shutdown that we're having around the world in various countries. Now, it's not going to be the point of this to argue whether it's an overreaction or a panic or whatever. That's neither here nor there. The adult person understands the world that he lives in and adapts himself to it. We have to, as speculators, and we're all speculators now, the speculator has to see the way things are, not the way they want them to be. If I was king for a day, I would do a lot of things, but I'm not. So I have to go out and kill what I want to eat, and I have to earn. So with the tumultuous markets that we're seeing and with the responses that we're seeing from governments, I said it in the weekly market update, the responses we're seeing are unprecedented. Trillions of dollars being created out of thin air and given away. Rates being cut to zero all over the place, or just massive rate cuts. I just went over a review. And so where is this leading us to? What is the result of this going to be? I just want to go over a few screenshots I pulled off this site that I go to that tracks gold and various currencies. So let's just do a quick review. Here's gold priced in Australian dollars, but this is for a kilogram of gold, not an ounce. But look, we have an all-time high in Australian dollars in the gold price. And look what's happened. It's not just been for the coronavirus. I mean, that's just last spike going higher here. But look what's happened even since a couple years ago. We've had this, this is monetary malfeasance. This is loss of trust in the Australian government and the Reserve Bank of Australia. This is a loss of purchasing power is what this indicates. Gold's making all-time highs. Is it just in Australia? No, let's go to another major market. Here's gold priced in British pounds, breaking out to an all-time high. Not just recently, this has been, bottomed in 2016 after the last peak, and look what it's done since. Let's look at Swiss francs. Not quite an all-time high, but definitely moving in that direction. This data goes back to 1976. This is your 1980 peak, and then the recent peak back in 2011, and now heading, at a, rocket ship trajectory. Let's look at yen. Yen, not an all-time high. The all-time high was made back in the 1980 gold spike, but definitely breaking out. Again, we're seeing the same trajectories, and all these are major markets. These aren't banana republics. If we want to look at a country, let's look at a country like India, the developing market. Again, all-time highs for gold in Indian rupees. If you want to see a basket case country, what happens? Let's look at Turkish lira. Gold price in Turkish lira since Erdogan's been in there. Look what's happened. Okay, so gold is doing what? It's a currency. It competes with these other currencies in value. It doesn't mean you're making more money. Things are relative. What gold is doing, though, is preserving purchasing power. It is going up in relation to the monetary debasement and government malfeasance that's taking place in all of these countries around the world. This is unprecedented what we're seeing. The amount of debt in the world is many, many times world GDP. And now we have this self-imposed, basically, depression that we've placed the world economy into, which I don't know what the outcome is going to be. I have no idea. But we do know how central banks and governments are going to react, and they're already starting to react. They're cutting rates, they're printing money, and they're going to give money away. But no one asks the question when the Trump administration comes up with a $2 trillion bailout package, where does the actual money come from? Now, we're not making all-time highs in the gold market in the U.S., but gold prices are moving up. Why? Because the U.S. dollar is being perceived as a safe haven, and we've had a lot of people pour into buy U.S. dollars and force the dollar up. Typically, what we've seen is the gold price is inversely correlated to the dollar. But that's going to change too if they're just going to print trillions and trillions of currency units. I've read just in the last couple of days where various pundits or experts, the Fed's balance sheet exploded to over 5 trillion now on their balance sheet. People are saying just in the next couple of years it could go to 10 trillion. Why not 20? We don't know. No one. This is just to respond to this particular crisis, non-crisis in my view. And when are we going back to work? What's going to happen when we go back to work? All the damage that's done. It's almost like the effects of World War II compressed instead of 4 or 6 years into 4 or 6 weeks. We have mass unemployment. All these businesses are going to be destroyed, and then the government's just going to print money. So I wanted to talk about this real quick. I don't want to get into a big thing. I just want to point this out that gold is acting as its historic preserver of wealth, life preserver, if you will. I showed that video many times, and Ray Dalio at the Council of Foreign Relations, all the masters of the universe, and he was talking about gold. It sticks in my mind because he's one of the masters of the universe. He runs that big hedge fund, got hundreds of billions of dollars under management, and he was asked about gold. Does he own it? He said, yes, he did. And people started laughing. They thought it was funny. And he said, well, why wouldn't I? It's a currency. It is a currency that cannot be debased. It cannot be messed around with by governments. It protects you against, it's insurance. It protects you against monetary malfeasance and the depredations of government, which are nothing new in history. Governments are going to react the same as they always did. They're going to make promises that they can't keep so that they can stay in power or get the favor of the ruled, and they're going to pay for it with, debased currency units. We're not even looking at the long-term problems. I was talking to somebody the other day, and they said, well, this is, I'm not here to change this. I'm just pointing this out. It's like we have all these underlying other issues. We have 100 to $200 trillion in unfunded Social Security and Medicare liabilities, which we have no way of paying for. We have, let's look at the state of Illinois. You have the city of Chicago's bankrupt, Cook County's bankrupt, the state of Illinois is bankrupt. Those pensions that are going to be paid to municipal workers are not going to be paid. As the electorate realizes this, they're going to want to vote for bailouts. Where's the money going to come from? That's not the only state. New York State, California, most of the states are in the same boat. Private pensions, 401ks being decimated. And everybody, turning their face to Washington like it's Mecca and saying, somebody do something. Well, we've created this problem. This problem's been created over a couple generations as we've strayed away from common sense, morality, and economic fundamentals. A human's kind of like a squirrel. They kind of understand subconsciously that you have to produce more than you consume and save the difference for a rainy day, but we don't do that. That's why we have half the population, living in a scenario where they don't have $400 in a checking account. And now we have this self-imposed depression we put ourselves into, and what nobody's thinking about what the repercussions of that are. I think if it goes on, I don't think you're just going to be able to hand everybody $1,000 a month, forever. I don't think that's going to happen. So when people start grumbling and people start realizing their dreams and hopes are destroyed and that they're actually hungry and they're suffering, you're going to have people in the streets. An older person called me the other day and said, I don't know what to do. I have this money in a bank account. Are they going to, debase the currency, go to negative interest rates? What should I do? I can't put it all in gold. I don't know what to do. Well, that's a perfect example of what I've been talking about. Everybody now there is no going and putting your money into a CD and kicking back with FDIC guarantees and clipping your coupons, or buying, 2-year treasury note that pays 5% and clipping your coupons, risk-free, perceived. Everybody's been forced to become a speculator now because of the government and because the federal government and the Federal Reserve's malfeasance of papering over all these problems. And people could say that I'm a Cassandra, but I'm showing you. Here's the charts. If you have a U.S.-centric view, people want to poo-poo gold, but look what's happening around the world. You can go to that website, and just about most of these currencies, gold's price in all these different currencies is making new highs. Does that tell you something? Does it tell you that we're at the end of the debt super cycle? Does it tell you that there's no options except for inflating these debts away? And what does that really mean socially, economically, politically, to you individually? As Jim Rickard said on Twitter this week, he said that, you should buy gold and his various books, and gold was a preserver of wealth. And now we're finding out that when people want it, they can't get it. If you don't have it, you're not getting it right now. It's very difficult to get because mines are shutting down, refiners are shutting down, it's being hoarded, which is typical. It's Gresham's law. Bad money pushes out good money. People are hoarding good money, gold. So I don't want this to go too long, but I want to bring up this magazine cover. Is inflation dead? This was from a couple years ago. Bloomberg Business Week. The deflating Tyrannosaurus Rex, the magazine cover, the ultimate contrarian signal. Is inflation dead? I don't think so. But how do we define inflation? Prices going up? I think that's the wrong way to define it. I go back to what Milton Friedman said. Inflation is an increase in currency units. Inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. What does that mean? That means if you can only increase goods and services at a certain rate. You can't expand the production of goods and services exponentially, but you can exponentially increase the money supply. And that's what happens. You get into a situation where you're just creating currency units ad nauseum. That's what they do in banana republics. That's how you get hyperinflations in the Weimar Germany in the 20s. Zimbabwe, Venezuela, various other banana republics. That's why you have the extreme, inflation that you have in Turkey, and look at the debasement of their currency vis-a-vis gold. At the beginning of the last uh, financial crisis in 2008, you could buy a kilogram of gold for around 40,000 Turkish lira. Now it's going to cost you 320,000 Turkish lira. That's 8 times increase. That doesn't mean you became 8 times richer. This is relative. It's preserving your purchasing power. It preserves your wealth. It's a store of value. So how do you make money? How do you increase your wealth? Well, then you have to speculate in gold stocks, which I'm not going to get into in this video, but there's a difference, and people need to understand the difference between, relative, nominal, and real returns. And I don't think people understand that either. That's probably a topic for another video. But I wanted to talk about what's happening and what's probably going to happen. You're going to see unprecedented amounts of money printing out of thin air. Who knows what programs that cannot be paid for. You have to ask yourself this question as a normal person trying to survive. Where are they getting the wealth and money for this? You can't just make currency units out of thin air and then have that create real wealth. It does not work that way. It's not intuitively correct. It's not economically correct. It's morally bankrupt. You have to produce real goods and services. You have to consume less than you produce, and you have to save the difference and store it in a real store of value, which can then be used. That's called capital, which can then be used to increase wealth and build new goods producing and service producing businesses and entities. That's how things really work. And we've gotten away from that. So I wanted to talk about that. I wanted to talk about what's going on with these central banks. I'll put links to these various websites so you can track these central bank actions, what's going on. I will put a link to the website that shows gold priced in different currencies. So if you want to get in there and play around with that, you can. But I would suggest to you that we are coming into uncharted territory, and that the old rules don't apply anymore. So that's it for this video. Thanks, guys. Appreciate your support. We'll talk to you next week.